We are talking about the evolution of fundraising and its consequences on mindset and practice. Stick around.
Welcome to All About Capital Campaigns, a podcast that provides fuel for your nonprofit's growth. Each week, Amy Eisenstein and Andrea Kilstead, co-founders of Capital Campaign Pro, provide practical tips about raising more money for your nonprofit organization. Here are your hosts, Amy and Andrea.
Hi, I'm Amy Eisenstein. Andrea's taking today off, but today I have a very special guest with me, Mallory Erickson. Mallory is an executive coach, a fundraising consultant, and host of the podcast, What the Fundraising. And Mallory is a good friend and colleague of mine, so I'm really excited she's here. Her signature framework, the Power Partners formula, equips nonprofits with the unique tools needed to secure more fundraising and funding, I should say. Funding, not fundraising, but both fundraising and funding. And today we are talking about her new book, and I'm so excited. It's called What the Fundraising? Embracing and Enabling the People Behind the Purpose. And I highly, highly recommend it. Hi, Mallory.
Hi, Amy. Thanks so much for having me and for having this conversation with me.
Yeah, absolutely. I always learn things when I talk with you. So I'm super excited that you agreed to do this. And I know our listeners are going to learn a lot. So let's dive into some of the concepts that you talk about in your new book. And let's start with scarcity mindset origins. Where does the scarcity mindset come from?
Yeah, well, I think you could likely trace it to a lot of different kind of combining factors, but I think the history of the nonprofit sector in particular, its sort of evolution out of capitalism, its rise in sort of like the Gilded Age and after, with an emphasis on, taxes and tax deductible donations. And then a lot of sort of the initial kind of founders of philanthropy really treating nonprofits and philanthropy as sort of this like side, trickle down,
yes.
Like pool of money. And that because there was like a lot of donor preferences prioritized, and there was, Carnegie has this sort of like famous quote, like to the needy and slothful, like he didn't want his funding to go to particular folks. And there was a lot of like donor control over money. And all of those origins really set up this like power dynamic between funders and nonprofits or volunteers, whoever was sort of implementing that mission work, that led to that same type of like the haves and the have-nots, which then created this like scarcity mindset, or this sort of like power dynamic around scarcity, not having the resources to ultimately be able to do our work. That, I think, mixed with the reality that, organizations have not been funded sufficiently to solve the problems that they are aiming to solve. And there continues to be a lot of sector-wide norms around funding that make nonprofits feel like they have to consistently do more with less. And then I think that mixed with stigma around talking about money, asking for money, all of these things sort of combine to create this like scarcity mindset in the sector. And there are a lot of other things we could go into detail around there too, but I think that gives you kind of like the overarching kind of framework of like the history to now. The other thing that I'll say is that material scarcity is a thing. And a lot of nonprofits are dealing with it in two ways. One, they're watching real material scarcity being experienced by those that their organization aims to support and partner with. They also are often dealing with material scarcity in the funding of their own organization. But material scarcity and scarcity mindset are two different things. And I just want to make sure to call that out, because material scarcity is real. And that is not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about the mindset that often layers on top of material scarcity, that are beliefs that we hold about what is and isn't possible, what is available to us, what we are, do have value around. And scarcity mindset adds a layer, a barrier layer to us as nonprofit professionals from being able to actually address that material scarcity. So I just want to sort of name that, because I think a lot of times people hear scarcity mindset and they're like, but we don't have enough money. And I'm like, yeah, different things, right? And so I just sort of want to name that out of the gate.
Well, let me see if I understand what you're saying. So it almost sounds like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? And sort of this vicious loop that organizations and people get into, thinking we don't have enough, so therefore we don't have enough. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, 100%. And I use that term a lot. And actually, there's a lot of science to sort of back this up, which is that our brains actually simulate our reality and sort of predict our reality into being. And so in the book, I talk about the work of Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett. I talk of the work of Dr. Christian Bush, who wrote about the science of serendipity. And all of this neuroscience, what it shows us is we can only raise the amount of money we believe is out there to be raised. Our brain, if we don't think we can do it, or that our donors don't have this capacity, or our donor pool will never step up to do blank, our brains literally will not find a solution for it. And so we absolutely continue to create these self-fulfilling prophecies.
All right, so we'll get to that in a minute. But before we do, let's talk about, well, I'll give you a choice. You want to talk about the very real problem or challenge of decline in giving, or transactional norms, or maybe some of both?
Yeah, we can talk about both, because it's kind of all the same, or it's all related in certain ways. So these scarcity beliefs that sort of have defined a lot of how we operate in this sector have led to these then transactional norms that a lot of us have been taught, either transparently or sometimes covertly, that have driven our fundraising to solely focus on money, or at least have tunnel vision around money. So those can be anything from focus on the Rolodex to, act like a car salesperson. And what does that mean? That means we are, want to get the money, whether or not it's really in the right interest of the donor, for example. And so in the book, I talk about these 5 different transactional norms. And what I'm saying, though, is that these are ways that a lot of us have been taught to fundraise. So if they ring true for you, know that that's totally normal. And this isn't about sort of shaming people around using them. Everything in the book, I talk about this was me. This is how I was taught. But those transactional ways of fundraising, they feel really bad to us as the fundraisers, and they feel really bad to donors. And so in the book, I talk about we're seeing this decline in financial giving to the sector, and we're seeing this staffing crisis, people leaving the sector in droves, really high turnover of fundraisers. I do not think that those are separate problems. I think they're both being caused by this transactional way of fundraising that is burning fundraisers out and feeling bad and alienating donors.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. But the good news is that you see a path forward, don't you? So what do fundraisers who are caught in this downward spiral, or this, this really stressful, difficult situation, right? Living with chronic stress and burnout and all the things that are associated with high stress fundraising. What do we do about it? Let's get to it. Let's get to it.
Okay. So I have kind of good news and bad news, right? I think I have the good news is that the solutions are also the same. The solutions to improve our experience and how we feel in our bodies and our stress and our burnout, if we address those, we also actually will see an increase in giving and fundraising, because once that fundraising starts to feel better to us, it's going to feel better to our donors too. And money moves in alignment, in connection, in real relationships. And so, I sort of mentioned these transactional ways of fundraising are leading to people leaving the sector in droves, but like, how is that happening? Like in the book, I talk about this decline in fundraising from discomfort to burnout, from discomfort to dysregulation, to chronic stress, to burnout that most fundraisers experience in one way or another. And I've been researching for the last few years the 5 primary components that I believe exist in fundraising, totally normally in fundraising, but are scientifically proven to lead to chronic stress and burnout. So rejection, uncertainty, power dynamics, pressure, and isolation. We talk a lot in our sector about like overwork and burnout. And I'm not saying like rest is not important, but I think even if we had everybody working 30-hour weeks and never on the weekend and never on the evening, if we don't recognize that these 5 elements of fundraising really impact our stress and our burnout, we actually won't solve the underlying problem. And so I know you were like, please talk about solutions. And now I'm like, more problems. But the reason that I'm doing that is because I think oftentimes we're like, ooh, this strategy is the solution. But then we apply more pressure to that fundraiser and we increase their stress, which gives them less capacity to use this, whatever solution it was that we thought we were providing to them. So by doing things that actually help reduce stress in fundraisers, giving them tools to be able to manage stress more holistically, creating spaces where people can talk about how they feel, where they can express discomfort, where they can talk about in safe ways, different challenges, where they feel supported in that way. All of those things that like we've talked about as like quote unquote like soft skills or like add-ons or whatever. My argument is that no, that is having a direct bottom line impact on that fundraiser's ability to fundraise successfully, effectively. And so if you want to see better fundraising outcomes, you have to start with holistic fundraiser support. And so in the book, I give a number of different kind of strategies, the way I talk about my entire coaching framework, basically. And I really like lay it all out there for folks, along with a number of really like immediate tools that they can start to use to downregulate their nervous system, be able to stay in action, bring more awareness into how they're feeling at different points. And then once they have that, all of this is under something I'm calling alignment fundraising. Once they have that inner alignment, then they can move into the second part of the solutions, which is around how do you, now that you have inner alignment, really ensure the organization is looking for alignment with funders? How do you identify alignment for different types of funders? How do you identify the different assets that you and your organization have that align with those funders? And then how do you build connected relationships? So how do you outreach to folks in ways that foster connection? I talk a lot about the science of connection in the book, and trust, and what does it mean to really be building those types of real relationships that, again, feel good to us and are healing even to our nervous system and feel good to the donor. And so more money moves through those relationships.
That's so interesting. So I'm curious for an example of one of those tools that you were talking about to help people, I don't remember the words you used, but sort of calm their nervous system, I think is sort of what you were alluding to. So I'm curious about one of those tools. I'll give you a minute to think about it and go back to something that I used to talk about a lot. There was a study, I think it was in the Harvard Business Review. The gist of it was that the researcher found this positive happiness loop, and that people who give to charity are happier. And what was it? What was the positive happiness loop? People who are happier give more. Oh, that's what it is. Happier people give more money, and the more you give, the happier you are, and you're in this positive happiness loop. So I don't know. What you're talking about sort of reminded me of that. And, it is about mindset. I think it's really hard once you're in, to change your mindset. That I think is the challenging part. But when somebody calls us to talk about a capital campaign, I know pretty quickly whether they're going to be successful or not. And truthfully, it's about whether they think they can or they think they can't. And, when they come and tell me, these are the 45 challenges and here's why I don't think we can, I tend to agree with them. And on the other hand, somebody honestly with sort of a similar donor situation might come and say, well, we're going to do it. We're going to figure out a way. We have to do it. And I'm open to learning. I'll do whatever it takes. I'm like, oh, you have the same donors and generate the same dollars as the person that called an hour ago, but you're going to do it and they're not. And I think it comes down to mindset. So give us one tool that you recommend that a donor who's feeling anxious and stressed and potentially on the verge of burnout, because I think that honestly is how most fundraisers and maybe people in the world are feeling these days. What's one thing that we can do, just maybe sitting at our desk or?
Yeah. Can I give you one brain one and one body one?
Oh, yes.
Okay. So in the book, I only do cognitive tools because it's sort of too difficult primarily to do somatics in a book unless you go a lot deeper in a lot of different things. So from a cognitive perspective, truly the quickest, easiest thing you can do is acknowledge and validate how you feel and say to yourself, that makes sense. So you're really just saying like, oh, you notice. So it involves noticing resistance in your body, noticing fear showing up. And then instead of being like, oh, you should be better at this, Mallory, or you should know how to do this by now. Instead, you just say, yeah, okay, I'm really nervous going into this donor meeting. It feels high stakes and I'm worried they won't like everything I have to say. That makes sense. This is from The Science of Britt Frank. She wrote this book called The Science of Stuck, and I can share a podcast link with her as well. But it's truly like throwing a bucket of cold water on like a fire in your brain. And it seems overly simplistic, but it is acknowledging and validating is a really, really beneficial tool. So that's one. Then in terms of like a somatic, so like something in your body, one thing you can do, and you can do this in the middle, I'm going to give you one that you can do in the middle of any meeting as well. So put both your feet on the floor. If you are in a virtual meeting and you can be barefoot, that's even better. But
I'm doing it now. Feet on the floor, barefoot.
Close your eyes and just pay attention to how each of your feet is fully touching the ground. Like first kind of wind your consciousness around your right foot and notice if like every corner, every area of that foot is like touching the ground. Just make sure it's like fully in full contact. And then go to your left foot and do the same thing, sort of wind your consciousness around. Notice if every area, every toe is touching the ground. And just take a few deep breaths if you're listening to this while you do that, really holding your consciousness in that place. That's a really quick, like grounding exercise. If you like that and you want to look up others, you can look up box breathing. You can look up something called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, which is like noticing, looking at 5 things that you can see and 4 things you can hear and 3 things you can touch and 2 things you can taste. All of these things help bring us into the present moment, and they activate our parasympathetic nervous system. So when we're stressed, our sympathetic nervous system is online. Sometimes we can use brain tools to help downregulate and come out, and sometimes we need to use our body and activate our parasympathetic nervous system, which is our rest and digest function, to help reduce our stress in that moment.
I love it. I feel like I'm literally and figuratively grounded right now with my feet on the floor. So I appreciate that. I really took the time to do it, and I think it worked. All right. So you provide all these new tools, and presumably many fundraisers aren't doing these things because they're caught up in this hamster wheel of fundraising, and every day is another fire. But let's say they read your book, what is their next step, and what is holding fundraisers back from taking action? Maybe those aren't two of the same thing, so you can answer them separately. But so a next step is reading your book, obviously, and we're going to tell them again the title and where to find it in just a minute. But what do you think is holding fundraisers back from trying to do some of these clearly urgent and necessary strategies to help them move forward?
I think we have a lot of kind of myths that these are like self-care has kind of gotten like pigeonholed in this like bubble bath and, place. And really like my hope is that I don't know that people feel the incentive to do it. And maybe they think that it's too big, right? They're like, I don't have time for that, Mallory. Like I have so much, you haven't seen my to-do list, right? And so like my argument is that like, no, I have seen your to-do list because I have had that exact same to-do list. And I know what it feels like to not feel like you have time to take care of yourself, or you will have time after you finish. And what I want people to really hear is like your ability to tackle that to-do list, to do everything that you want, to realize your hopes and dreams for your organization, to raise the amount of money you need to raise, requires you to pause. It requires a tiny moment of space and reflection and feeling your own feelings. And you can do so many of these things from the comfort of your chair in the middle of another meeting. And so I really like want people to feel maybe a new sense of motivation to prioritize it, because a lot of times the reason we are not taking action is because we are stressed or afraid of whatever that action is, right? Like it's very easy to say, oh, I didn't have time to call that donor. But when I ask, every time I speak, I'm like, how many people here have a few tasks on their task list that take, 2 to 5 minutes, but have maybe been sitting on that task list for a few weeks? And everybody kind of like sheepishly raises their hand. Yes. And I'm like, is it possible that some of those are not about time, but perhaps they're some of the most vulnerable and scary tasks on that list? And if this is true for you, if you're listening to this and you're like, oh, Mallory, ouch, one, like totally normal. And two, that is exactly why these tools are so important. Because if you want to take action on those tasks, you can't do it from a stressed out state because your body is in survival mode. And in survival mode, our body's job is to shut down everything that doesn't keep us safe and doesn't conserve our energy, which means nothing vulnerable, risky, connected, right? And so if we want to do those things as fundraisers, which we do, then we have to get out of that part of our brain to be able to do it.
I think this is such an important conversation, especially for so many of our listeners who are either in capital campaigns or heading into capital campaigns, because getting your mental house in order before you head into a big fundraising effort like a capital campaign, I think is so critical, and sort of to slow down and assess what you're doing and take stock of what's going on and what the priorities are, so that you're not running around like a chicken with your head cut off, because that nobody wants to be in a place like that. Nobody wants to go to work like that every day. It doesn't feel good. And so how can we get back to why you got into fundraising and nonprofit work in the first place? Because you want to help people, because you want to feel good, because you want to do good work. And I think it's really hard to do good work when you're coming at it every day from a place of high stress and high anxiety, which ultimately is what's happening. So I think this book is so important. I just want to remind listeners that if you are heading into a capital campaign and you want a coach, a guide, a muse, not to reinvent the wheel, to bring down your stress level, I want you to call me, reach out to Capital Campaign Pro and see how we can help you, because actually we're adding some new tools and resources and strategies and webinars on mindset, because we know how important it is at capital campaigns. And Mallory, tell people where they can find you and how they can get your new book.
Yes, you can. If you go to MalloryErickson.com, you can see all of the different ways that I work with folks. If you go to MalloryErickson.com/book, you can get directly connected to all the places where books are sold and grab your copy and let me know what you think. And if you need, after you read the book, additional support on implementing what is inside of the book, we've just started the Alignment Fundraising Collective, which is just a month-to-month really membership community for folks who really want to focus on alignment first fundraising. So you can check that out as well on my website. And I can't wait to hear what you think.
I love it. Thank you so much for joining me today, Mallory. I always learn something when I'm speaking with you. So thank you for sharing your wisdom and your calming presence with our listeners. And listeners, we'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining Amy and Andrea for today's All About Capital Campaigns. To learn more about them and their work together, visit capitalcampaignpro.com, where you'll find all the help you'll need for your campaign. And please follow, rate, and review us on your favorite podcasting platform. Thank you.